Our webinar topic today is about the rise of digital labor in Indonesia and the Philippines. We are going to discuss especially discursive construction by intermediaries and the state. The presenter for today's webinar will be me. I am Titi Puji Rahayu from Communication Department Universitas Airlangga. I've been teaching in Airlangga since 2003. I got my master degree from Edith Cowan University, Australia, and I got my PhD from the University of Sydney. Currently, I and all of the colleagues at the Communication Department Universitas Airlangga, we are initiating a research group concerning digital labor and digital culture in Indonesia. And my colleague today to discuss about digital labor is Professor Cheryl Ruth Soriano. Hello, Cheryl. How are you? I would like to thank to Cheryl especially because I like her willingness to respond to my offer, my proposal to have a webinar collaboration today. Professor Cheryl Ruth Soriano, PhD, is a professor in De La Salle University, Department of Communication, the Philippines. Her research focuses on the implication of digital media on social, cultural, and political practices, as well as in the construction of new organizational forms and practices. She has been researching the changing nature of employment relation and labor market transformation facilitated by digital platform in the Global South over the 5 years now. Cheryl was a visiting fellow at the Center for Communication, Politics, and Culture at RMIT University in Australia. Okay, regarding our webinar topic today, the rise of digital labor in Indonesia and the Philippines. First of all, before I start my presentation, I need to give an overview why I and Cheryl think that it is important for us to bring this about. Why Indonesia and the Philippines? Why digital labor in Indonesia and the Philippines? First of all, we need to highlight that now we have the phenomenon of digital labor surrounding us with the context that the traditional labor in both countries, in Indonesia and in Philippines, still need an improvement. There is still issue regarding regular or traditional labor in Indonesia. We still every year see the labor went to street going rally, demanding a better working condition. This is in case of the regular or traditional labor. Regarding digital labor, previous studies show how Indonesia and Philippines provide a significant number of digital labor as compared to other countries globally. This is the previous study by Graham, George, and Don Virta shows that like this. If I make some of them grayscale, it becomes clearer that Indonesia and Philippines have a significant number of digital labor. Yeah, according to this figure, it shows that the number of digital labor in Indonesia, it has been the biggest, and Philippines is the second. Yeah, as compared to other countries. And interestingly, we can see here in the middle of the circle here, both Indonesia and Philippines has a very light color in the circle. According to the author, the light color here indicates that digital labor in the country have a very low wage, or very low welfare, yeah, very low earning from their work in the digital platform. So we can compare like in other countries like China, Ukraine, Russia, and USA, they have a darker middle, which means like their digital labor has better welfare as compared to our country. So with this consideration, that's why I and Cheryl think like discussing, comparing the phenomenon of Indonesia and Philippine digital labor will give us insight on how we need to further improve, yeah, their right and their working condition. Okay, now I will proceed to my presentation about digital labor in Indonesia. My presentation will specifically discuss the politics of digital labor labeling in Indonesia by Indonesian intermediaries. I'm taking the cases of Gojek and Kompasiana. So, of course, the central concept I use in my study is digital labor. We need to understand and define the term first. And to understand the term digital labor, I think we need to go back in the understanding about labor. So what is labor before we discuss what is digital labor. So in understanding labor here, I follow the understanding proposed by Karl Marx in his work Capital. Karl Marx explained his understanding about labor through the model of capital accumulation process. So this is the model. Yeah? This is the model that portray how capitalists, yeah, in their company produce commodities and then sell it to the market. Like how is the process? Yeah, M here stand for money, C for cost. Yeah, so capitalists will need money, yeah, to pay the cost of labor, to pay the cost of mean of production. Labor, of course, the person who will do the job, the work, and mean of production can be the building, the infrastructure, the ingredient, the material that is needed to produce particular commodity. So after the capitalists spend the cost for labor and mean of production, then labor here will use the means of production to create product. So we see here there is the key understanding is that labor are those who are involved, contribute in the production of commodity. Yeah. And after the product produced, and then the capitalist will sell the product. Yeah, the capitalist will sell the product with the price higher, of course, yeah, higher than the sum of labor cost and mean of production cost. So if the labor cost 1,000, mean of production cost 200, total 1,200, the company will sell maybe 1,500 or maybe 2,000. So there will be like a profit margin that the company aim for. So here is labor in a Marx understanding in the capital accumulation process. Next, we also need to understand that traditional labor are geographically bounded with their workplace. Yeah, traditional labor every day they need to go to the factory, they need to gather there with other workers to do the work, because the means of production are put there by the capitalists, so they need to come to that factory. Yeah, the reason we need to highlight this because this social background like this that these workers are gathered in one place every day during weekdays, yeah, make it make it easier for them to establish labor union. Every day they meet each other, every day they work together, and then during recess time, maybe they chat with each other about their working condition, about their welfare. So then they know, like, if they think they need an improvement, then they can deliver the demand through labor unions. Yeah, and indeed it is very critical for labor to establish labor union, because this is their only way to generate power by number. Yeah. Labor, even though they are, we know that capitalists are having economic power, they are rich, yeah, they have economic power, they can influence the state with their economic power, they can obtain political power through their economic power, and that's why labor need to build union, yeah, to generate power by their number if they demand better working condition. So here, McChesney highlight a constant conflicting interest between capitalists and labor. As I presenting in the Karl Marx capital accumulation process, we can see that if capitalists want to increase their margin profit, what they need to do is they need to suppress their labor cost and mean of production cost, of course, yeah. So because capitalists tend to suppress labor costs, that's why they are in a conflict with digital labor, because labor always demand for better welfare. Now, with this understanding about traditional labor, then how we should understand digital labor? Digital labor, the phenomenon of digital labor has been developed not only just because the internet, but prior to that, with the telecommunication technology, we know that there are many call center were like doing the job actually for foreign companies, yeah. And Cheryl told me that in Philippines, it is like the most common job there. People working in a call center for foreign companies, yeah. So even the telecommunication technology before the internet facilitate the emergence of digital labor. The distinctiveness of digital labor as compared to traditional labor, as we can see, digital labor not necessarily need to work from particular places like the traditional labor. They don't actually need to go to factory, a geographical location. They can work from home, yeah. They can be in a far away location from their boss, from their employer, yeah. So between employer, worker, and the end user of the product, that they can be separated, yeah, in a different corner of the planet. It is easy for us to address like, oh, call center company is call center worker are digital labor, or we address those who in a bit who got money from freelancing site like this as digital labor, yeah. It's easier for us to address them as digital labor, but the question is how we will consider more consider the labor practice in the social media industry, like YouTube. Yeah, how can we address the YouTube content creator as labor? Can we address a Facebook user as digital labor? Can we address a Twitter user, TikTok content creator as digital labor? Yeah. So there has been a debate about that. Should or should not we categorize them and their work as labor? Yeah. Because as it has been highlighted by Scott, in opposition to traditional labor, casual digital labor look merely like the expenditure of cognitive surplus, the act of being speaker within communication system. It doesn't feel, look, or smell like labor at all. Regarding this, Christian Fuchs proposed his understanding that how to understand internet user in this as digital labor. Yeah, Christian Fuchs adopt the model developed by Karl Marx earlier, yeah, to explain digital labor in the social media industry. So, according to Fuchs, similar to traditional company, capitalists of media industry, of course, will need money. Yeah, they need it to pay the cost of technology infrastructure, the mean of production. Yeah, the company need to provide electricity, internet connection. They need to provide computer, cable, everything. Yeah, the infrastructure to create a social media platform, and then after spending money for the mean of production, the company also need to spend money to pay for the first level labor. This first level labor are IT specialists who develop the social media platform. In the traditional industry, the result of this process will be a product that can be directly sold to the third party. Yeah? But in the case of social media industry, the result will be P1. P1, like you can imagine like an empty YouTube platform, an empty Facebook platform, an empty Instagram platform. The platform is there, it has been produced as a product, but this product cannot be sold. Yeah? The social media company cannot sell it to anyone. So they need the second process by involving users, yeah, to use this platform for free, and then the company will obtain from this user their personal data, the content they produce. Yeah, this is what is called as P2 according to Fuchs. This P2, this product here, this is the real commodity that actually can be sold by the social media company to advertiser. So while P1 cannot be sold to advertiser, P2 can be sold to advertisers. Yeah. The thing is that this labor here who do this work, they tend to be unpaid. And as Scott said before, this practice seems sound like a surplus of like you have like free time and then you just do it for fun, yeah. So it doesn't feel like work at all. But actually, this is work. This is labor. Why? Because of this activity, then the value of the commodity can be created. Without this activity, by this level 2 labor, then the product will not have a value to be sold to a third party. So by adopting a Fuchs understanding here, then we can understand those that digital labor are those who are participate, who are contribute in a creation of value by using digital labor platform. Yeah, digital labor platform can be many various, like social media platform, like YouTube, like Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, yeah, to freelancing site, yeah, and also the e-hailing services like Gojek, Uber, they are all digital labor platforms. So people who are participate in making this platform has an economic value, then they are digital labor. Okay, now we focus to Indonesia, the rise of digital labor in Indonesia. The rise of digital labor actually driven by two factors. First of all, unemployment and underemployment. And secondly, the increasing internet penetration. And I think that's very relevant to Indonesia. Indonesia still has a high unemployment and underemployment. Yeah, that's still a significant issue in Indonesia. And also the second aspect that driven the rise of digital labor in Indonesia is, of course, internet penetration. If we compare, yeah, between from 2006, yeah, from 2006 in Indonesia, internet access is very limited, only in Java here, the gray part here, only in Java, and it is facilitated mainly by internet cafe. So at that time, still rarely people have internet connection at home, and mobile internet access is not yet common. Yeah, not too many people having a mobile phone with internet access. Yeah, they have mobile phone, but the mobile phone is not yet not used, not having good internet access. But by 2016, when I use the real-time application OpenSignal here, this is a real-time application. So when I input Indonesia, and then I want to see all networks that cover Indonesia, and then the application show that actually in Indonesia in 2016, we can see so much area has strong internet signal here by mobile internet signal. Yeah. So internet access in Indonesia has been, until today, has been significantly supported by the rise of mobile internet. And this data also been confirmed by the Indonesian Internet Service Provider Association, by the International Telecommunication Union, yeah, the increasing trend of internet penetration in Indonesia. So that's why it's understandably that Indonesia have this, yeah, that come out with this significant number of digital labor. Talking about digital labor in Indonesia, we need also to I need also to highlight the significant development of national digital intermediaries in Indonesia. Yeah. So while the number of digital labor has been increasingly so, while the number of digital labor in Indonesia has been increased so much, yeah, the number has been so significant. We also need to know that Indonesia has the development of digital intermediaries in Indonesia has also been significant. Yeah, digital intermediaries are companies that develop digital labor platform that can be used by users, yeah, to communicate, to disseminate their work. Yeah, so any company that develop digital labor platform, for example, like Gojek, Gojek in Indonesia, and Gojek is a leading dekakorn in Asia. Yeah, we have Indonesia also Tokopedia, Traveloka, Bukalapak, OVO. Yeah, they are emerging unicorns. Means that their economic power are significant. In this study, I specifically analyzed Gojek and Kompasiana. Yeah, Kompasiana may be not a part of the unicorn, yeah, but Kompasiana has been considered as the most extensive citizen journalism site in Indonesia. Yeah, by scholar. Yeah, scholar refer to it as the most extensive citizen journalism sites. Yeah, but Kompasiana itself deny their platform to be a citizen journalist platform, but name it as blogging site, as we can see here, Kompasiana Beyond Blogging. And then I will later explain why the naming here is so important. Okay, now why digital labor labeling? Yeah, I said like my study will focus on the aspect of digital labor labeling by these two companies, Gojek and Kompasiana. I refer to the work by Gillespie titled The Politics of Platform. Yeah, Gillespie raised our awareness about the discursive work by digital intermediaries. Yeah, Gillespie notes that leading multinational digital intermediaries like YouTube, like Facebook, yeah, they have carefully chosen terms. They choose label, they choose words to categorize their company, to refer to particular technology they use, yeah, to address their business strategy. So this is a company who are very proactive, yeah. They don't wait for academic or policymaker to name them, to name their technology, to categorize them, but they proactively define who am I. Yeah, they refuse definition by others. Yeah, Gillespie highlight that through the chosen terms, digital intermediary attempted to shape public opinion. This is what is crucial. So it's not simply naming. It's not simply a name, a label. We have to understand this as an effort to shape public opinion about what? About their roles, about their rights, about their obligation. Yeah? So this is becomes so crucial because it's rich into the policy at the end. Yeah. Gillespie continue, particular discursive work by digital intermediaries are often aimed to downplaying their roles. Yeah, this is interesting. Yeah, so rather than saying that we are having this role to the society, digital intermediaries somehow tend to downplaying their roles. Yeah, for example, especially for online content aggregators. Yeah, so platform that collect content from user, for example, like Kompasiana, like YouTube, yeah, like TikTok, yeah, they are content aggregators, yeah, because they don't produce the content, but they only collect content, yeah, content from users. So their tendency are to pursue limited legal and cultural liabilities for the content, yeah. So they develop the discursive, the idea that what we are doing is providing facility for the society. Yeah, they can use this platform to express. Yeah, this is facilitating freedom of speech. It is like that. Yeah, they can use it to say anything they want. But when the content produced by user, maybe it's like cause break the law, or it's raise particular cultural concern, then the company will they pursue limited liability. That's not our responsibility, because not us who make the content, they make the content. So we are only aggregators. YouTube are carefully positioning themselves to user, client, advertiser, and policymaker, making strategic claim for what they do and do not do, and how their place in the information landscape should be understood. Yeah. Intermediaries like YouTube need to position themselves as just hosting, yeah, which means empowering all by choosing none. Yeah. The same situation has been shown by Facebook. Yeah, this is like for about 2 years ago when Facebook has been countered by the parliament in the US about what is Facebook actually. Yeah, this is Mr. Greg Walden, one senator, asking Facebook. He asked Facebook to choose in which category it is actually fit in. Yeah, is it like an advertising company, because Facebook also provide advertisement space? Yeah, is it a publishing company, or is it telecommunication company? Yeah, that common carrier company in the information age. And very clever, Mr. Zuckerberg replied that he didn't want his company to be placed under the existing category of media and telecommunication industry. He don't want to. So instead, he said, "I consider us to be a technology company." Yeah. This naming strategy. This is a discursive work. Yeah, and the impact is on the legal liability. Yeah, because Facebook denied to be an advertising company, then any advertising policy cannot be applicable to Facebook, because Facebook refused to be considered as a news media company. Then any regulation related to news media company cannot be applied to Facebook. Yeah, Facebook choose a by using a statement a technology company means that Facebook choose to be regulated by nothing and except by their own regulation, self-regulation. Yeah. Did my study also refer to the concept of the study about the power of labeling? Yeah. Retzlaff argued that labeling is a political act, since label include and exclude. Yeah. What label people give to you, to me, yeah, it includes something within that label, but also it excludes something. Yeah. Moncrieff argued three political aspects of labeling practice. Yeah. First of all, labeling process involve relationship of power. Those more powerful actors have more chance to label. Yeah, not in reverse. Yeah. Those who are powerful can be economic power, or political power, or cultural power. Secondly, there are diverse motivation for labeling. Yeah. So there are no single reason why by a person labeling a person this label. Yeah, there are many motivation, and that's why researchers need to be very critical. What motivates this label? What interest behind the label? Finally, labeling and framing process involve complex relation of accountability and diverse obligatory relationship, yeah, complementary and conflicting. This means that with the labeling, the relationship between actor has been determined. Yeah. So I will show later how we can apply this understanding on the way Gojek label their driver and the way Kompasiana label their writer. I also refer my study, trace back the history of labor labeling in Indonesia, and I found that very early study in 1973 actually discussed about this. Yeah, that labor labeling in Indonesia actually part of political struggle. Yeah, so the term buruh and karyawan has been so problematic since the 1960s, yeah, since the old and new order of Indonesia, yeah. So the term buruh has been known to be very close to the idea of Marxism, yeah. The idea of Marxism, very close to the idea of demonstration, strike, instability, yeah. So the government proposed a new term, yeah, to be used rather than buruh. The government preferred the word karyawan. So the government make a structural and comprehensive steps, ya, to make the word karyawan more popular rather than buruh, ya. For maybe Cheryl, I don't know, buruh here means labor, karyawan mean worker, ya, worker or employee, ya. So in Indonesia, the word labor, the government, the state tend to favor the word karyawan rather than buruh. During the new order regime, new order is between 1966 to 1998, yeah. The word buruh or labor had been gradually replaced with pekerja or workers, and then to become karyawan or employees. Yeah, it is interesting to know that actually this labor labeling practice has been started earlier before the digital labor. Yeah, and it reflects the enduring ideological tension between capitalism and Marxism in Indonesia. Yeah, we know that Indonesia so much against communism, Marxism. They are, this concept tend to be put like in a left wing, yeah, and somehow not to be discussed, not to be. It's like a red zone, yeah, in Indonesia, yeah. Even if you have like a coffee shop and then you put a sign of PKI, the Indonesian Communist Party in the past, then it will lead you to a serious problem in Indonesia. Yeah? So I think it's clear that Indonesia is much more to capitalism rather than to Marxism or communism. Now, with all of those academic understanding before about digital labor, about labor labeling practice, and labor labeling politics, then I would like to bring those understanding to understand how the discursive work by Gojek and how it impact the labor. Yeah, just simple statement: driver are mitra or partner, not buruh. Yeah, I think all Indonesian in this forum, we are very familiar with this statement, yeah, made by Gojek. Yeah, driver are mitra or partner, not buruh or labor. Yeah, this statement has been repeatedly said by Gojek official from Nadiem Makarim to his staff. Yeah, and if you analyze, trace the news, yeah, and then you will find that this statement always been used when Gojek reply to driver who demand better working condition. Yeah. So whenever drivers deliver complaint, they gather to express their thinking, their difficult situation. The reply always this, and it's like solve everything. Yeah, drivers are mitra, not buruh. Because after this statement, always the following statement is that because you are mitra, you are free to quit. Yeah. You can just quit if you don't like this condition. Many people are willing to join us. Yeah. And then it makes all the driver like silent, yeah, because yeah, this is a very simple statement, but I think it's highly political here. Yeah, it's include and exclude. It's by addressing driver as mitra, so there are particular rights, yeah, particular labor rights that has been excluded. Yeah, they are not entitled to those rights. And how the government respond to this? Yeah, what I noticed is that the government, as we know, support the discursive work by Gojek. For example, when our transportation minister, when he call Gojek driver, he said, Mitra Gojek. So he used the term Mitra following the discursive work that has been developed by Gojek, yeah, and he said that Mitra Gojek should stop go on strike, yeah, because you are Mitra. So the using of the word mitra here make Gojek driver feel different from labor, yeah. Whereas if we look back to how I explained, we go back to the definition of labor and digital labor, then we came to an understanding that labor are those who are participate in the production of commodity. The commodity of Gojek is riding service. So the driver here, because they are participate making the transportation service, can they deliver the transportation service, then they are labor, yeah. But this statement, this label has been like continually being repeat to them that you are mitra, yeah. So you should not go on strike. Discuss this thing. You are not go on strike, but make a discussion, yeah. Another thing is we can see regarding omnibus law or UU Cipta Kerja, our recent omnibus law. I don't really keen to discuss this much because there's still many drafts circulating, and I don't know which one is the correct one. It's make me worry, and also because it's still on the process, because the government say they will keep revising it. But the one thing I noticed from the omnibus law regarding digital labor is the tendency to extend labor outsourcing practice. Yeah, so only this which I see in the draft of omnibus law, which might be relevant to the case of digital labor. But for the company, things will be easier, I think, because in this new proposed law, the government replace the previous transportation law, which forbid the using of motorbike for public transportation. So because it is only stated that it will replace the previous law, then all the restriction will gone and it will be easier for a Gojek company actually. But as for the worker, the driver, I still so far don't see anything clear about how the right will be better regulated through this law. In contrary, if you check the news, several government officials make a statement that omnibus law will make the life of online driver easier. It will benefit online drivers. But when you read the news, they always say, I cannot specify the benefit at the moment, but it will. so always like that. So they don't mention which article within the law that will be good for this online driver, but they make a statement that it will be positive for online driver. How then Gojek driver respond to this discursive practice? Yeah, I conducted 3 interviews with car Gojek drivers. Car Gojek drivers and 3 motorbike Gojek motorbike Gojek drivers. Yeah, so all of them reply when I asked them like this: are you involved in our last May Day rally? Yeah, the labor movement rally. Their reply is, but we are not buruh, man. We are mitra. So this is the very common statement I hear. They like questioning my question, like, what are you asking me? Why you ask me like that? We are mitra, not buruh. So as if my question is not relevant to them. Yeah. So then I interview them. They really understand that they accept this label mitra. Yeah. So without like denial. No one deny to be the label mitra, yeah, among my interview participants. So they accept this, and when I ask them what is mitra actually as compared to buruh, they find difficulty to explain it. Yeah, some of them say like, well, buruh are those who are working for factory. Yeah, so their imagination, what it's meant by factory is, factory, a place where there is a machine, things like that. So they need to come to that place and then work. That's buruh or labor. But we are mitra. We are not coming to those kind of place. They say like that. Also, some of them say like being mitra means flexible working hours. Yeah. Once they say flexible working hours, so in the beginning they say flexible working hours, but later they say like some of them say that they work morning till night. Yeah. So flexible, but without limitation. So they think positively about this flexibility of these working hours without realizing that they actually are working overtime. They don't count that. The company don't count that. Yeah. And also I found a lack of concern regarding severance payment. Yeah. So as I said, whenever the driver complain, Gojek always reply, you are mitra, not buruh. So if you want to quit, just quit. But doesn't mean that we have to pay severance payment. So this is about severance payment. Yeah. They don't have what we call uang pemecatan, itu uang PHK. Ya. So this labor, on the other hand, they think, yeah, we are not eligible for severance payment. We are not eligible for overtime payment. We are not eligible for pension because we are mitra, we are not buruh. So it's impact their understanding of their own rights. Yeah. And then when I asked this driver about how they perceive themselves as compared to buruh labor, like traditional labor, the all answer are like, well, we are different from them. Yeah, even though they cannot explain how they're different, but they say, yeah, we are not part of them. Yeah, and that's why there is among my interview participant, there is lack of willingness to join traditional labor movement. Yeah, because they so what I found is that the discursive work, they are mitra, not labor. On the side of digital labor, it creates like a perceptual demarcation between digital labor and traditional labor, that they are separated, that they need to make a separated movement. Now, regarding Kompasiana, as I said, Kompasiana is the leading citizen journalism platform in Indonesia. But again, this is Scholar whose label Kompasiana as citizen journalism platform. Kompasiana themselves reject the label citizen journalism platform. Kompasiana name itself as a blogging site. Like the tagline is beyond blogging, and they continually conducting blogging competition. So even in their user statement, Kompasiana forbid their writers to refer to themselves as citizen journalists. So Kompasiana never appointed any citizen journalist to work for Kompasiana. So Kompasiana refused the label citizen journalist for their writers. Yeah. Kompasiana, as I said, being the leading blogging platform in Indonesia, it has significant number of writers. Yeah, total content about 1,500,000 article. Yeah, so yeah, it's generate significant number of article. Yeah, every day. And the strategy which I noticed is through the blogging competition. Yeah, so regularly Kompasiana make a blogging competition, any blogging competition on various topic, but mostly a light topic like Ramadan blogging competition, things like that. Yeah. So for example, during Ramadan blogging competition, Kompasiana itself say that during 1 month they can gather 4,000 articles, yeah, and among those 4,000 articles, they give prize only to the 4 best paper, yeah, best 4 article with the highest price of 10 million, yeah. So you can imagine, like, if Kompasiana is not blogging competition, if the writer is not casual writers, if it write by employed journalists, how much labor cost Kompasiana has to pay. Yeah? But because this is like blocking competition, and because the word block here refer to create a meaning like there is writers are willingly writing here by themselves. No one forced them to write. So the writers themselves, they don't think that they need to complain. Yeah. This is actually the same strategy like conducted by YouTube. Yeah. So YouTube created particular figure who always who managed to get the diamond button. Yeah. It is a strategy to invite content from users. Yeah. So again, Kompasiana company reject the term citizen journalist. Even the founder of Kompasiana, Bapak Pepih Nugroho, stated that citizen journalists are citizen but not journalists. So the conclusion is that Kompasiana writer are not citizen journalists. Yeah. And interestingly, the Indonesian Press Council are in support to the idea of Kompasiana that there is no such thing as citizen journalist. Yeah, so Kompasiana don't use the word citizen journalist, forbid the writer to refer to themselves as citizen journalist. Yeah, but they use the word blogger. The Indonesian Press Council also stated that Indonesia, in our Indonesian press law, we don't recognize citizen journalists, so there is no protection for citizen journalists. On the other hand, we have Independent Journalist Alliance, yeah, who argue that citizen journalists are journalists. They should be protected by the press law. Yeah. However, the Independent Journalist Alliance thinks citizen journalists are not labor. Yeah. So there is a different understanding about what is labor, yeah, in Indonesia. How about Kompasiana writers themselves respond to this discursive work about between blogger, citizen journalist, labor here? Yeah, my study found resolute rejection by the bloggers, the Kompasiana writer that I invite in my focus group discussion. They stated, wait, we are bloggers, yeah, we are not citizen journalists. Yeah. So while Aji try to promote the idea of citizen journalists, that bloggers are citizen journalists, this blogger, they deny to be labeled as citizen journalists. Yeah. The reason why they deny the label citizen journalist is because, to my surprise, most of my FGD informant are previously they are employed journalists, so they intentionally quit, yeah, the press industry because they don't think the working condition is good there. Yeah, so they said we are proud to be blogger because by being blogger we have independency. They said, yeah, independency in working hours, independency in the interest of writing. Yeah, there is no editor who will say like you have to write this topic. Yeah, they don't like it, and also the style of writing, they can write the way they like to write. Yeah, so this perceived independency make them believe that being blogger is so much is better than being citizen journalist or journalist. Yeah. And when I asked them about how about labor, how you position yourself in a as compared to labor, they say, what labor? Well, it's depend on how you define labor, they say. But if labor are those who are always go on street strike, going strike on street, we are not those kind of labor, they say. So, and all informant in my FGD say they are not think that they will join traditional labor movement. So the conclusion that I can generate from my study is that discursive work by digital intermediaries, Gojek or Kompasiana, has significant impact to the state, how the state define the new this new labor platform industry. Yeah, and then it's also impact the worker themselves, the digital labor, how they perceive their position within the company, how they perceive their rights, how they perceive how they perceive their relation to other labor, yeah, to the traditional labor. I think that's all my presentation.